I'm gonna get my life together one of these days. All right, it's really an honor for me to be able to teach today. It's my firstborn daughter's bat mitzvah, first one we've had in our family, and I know I've taught her a lot of useful skills. I just know it, right? Swimming, bike riding, even some, I don't know, I guess less useful ones like the lizard earring. I don't know if y'all can see that. Um, Pickleball's probably not that useful, but man, it sure is fun. But I I feel that we got to focus leading up to this. We really got to focus on the spiritual side of things a little bit. We've got to work through a lot of useful skills that I think she needs in her spiritual life. So um, as we prepared this teaching, or as we prepared for her teaching, we really wanted her to be able to take charge of her own spiritual development. Right. And it was about 2 or 3 years back, we had Noah's bar mitzvah. A lot of you were there. And I chose to focus on a theme in that service that I saw Solomon bringing forth in Proverbs 1 through Proverbs 9, the chapters there. And while that message was for everyone present, I wanted it to be real advice Noah could grab on, take with him for the rest of his life. All right. So and that particular advice was advice that King Solomon was giving to his son. Was giving to his son. Um, it's doing that thing whenever I try to do it. It like collapses my whole screen over here. Oh, you know what? I think it does it less when I'm using the mouse. So let me try. Let me try using the mouse. Um, And there was something, okay, so King Solomon was giving this advice to his son to set him up for a good life. All right. And one of the things that you hear in the beginning of chapter 1, Solomon tells his son, is, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching." Right. They're a graceful garland around your head and a pendant. It says a pendant around your neck. All right. So let's just assume he would also say this to his daughter. I think he would. All right. So my main purpose today is to give you a final follow-up to our study time together through the mentoring that we've had. And I want to give you some final details I think are important to interpretation. And then towards the end of this, I'll wrap it up by giving a demonstration of these interpretive techniques. All right. So Solomon tells his son about these two women. This is going back to Noah's bar mitzvah teaching. And the first woman is called Wisdom. And you see her calling out to the simple boys towards the end of chapter 1. She says, "How long, oh you simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will you scoffers delight in your scoffing?" And then you meet the other woman, which he calls the strange woman in a few chapters later. And it describes her in this way: "For the lips of a strange woman drop as a honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil." You can hear the slithering going on in the background behind that. And it says, "But her end is as bitter as wormwood, as sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, and her steps take hold on hell." So I think what Solomon is trying to point out between the comparison between these two women is simply this. He's trying to say what to hold on to and what to push away. Right? Take these things, but don't take these things. In fact, get them far away from you. Some of you have heard me make this point many times. I grew up reading Proverbs every day with my father and my brothers. We were up 5:30, and Monday through Friday, we were reading the Proverbs. And to this day, I still tease my wife with the proverb that says, "Drink water from your own cistern and running water from your own well." Hey, if you know, you know. Okay. So, but really, that proverb is a metaphor for romance and also fidelity in marriage, right? And it's a good thing to say to your spouse. All right. But when I met my wife, I was not on a good path. Fortunately, the character traits of what they call the Eshet Chayil were calling to her, or calling to me from her. And what is the Eshet Chayil? It is the Proverbs 31 woman, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. So what I want to do is to bring up in this teaching for you, Sydney, the PaRDeS levels of interpretation. All right, so let me get into or explain. Some of this is going to be new information for some of you. Some of you have heard this and seen it demoed or examples of it many times. But let me introduce you to PaRDeS if it's new. PaRDeS is a four-letter acronym, and it stands for 4 different levels of interpretation. All right, the first is P, Peshat, and this is surface level. This is a plain understanding, plain reading of the text. Literal, very literal word interpretations going on there. All right, next is R for Remez. And Remez are an allusion that the text is making to another part of Scripture. I like to think of it as an analog hyperlink, if that makes any sense. If you can be tech-minded with me for a second. An analog hyperlink. So reverse tech. And third is D for Darash, right, which is a homiletical extrapolation of ethics and character that's going beyond just what the text says, and it's pulling out principles. Okay, and this is what you will hear in most churches. This is a very common type of interpretation. Most pastors, when they're giving a message, they're teaching in the Darash. And then fourth is the sometimes controversial level, which is Sod. And this is the mystical interpretations, as people most commonly put it. Now, I know what you are thinking, all right? I don't care about all this deep stuff. Multi-level interpretation, scholarly mumbo-jumbo. It's all a bunch of boring, sleeping talk, all right? But let me tell you why you should care, all right? Solomon says it's important, all right? And it's actually one of the reasons he writes the entire book of Proverbs. All right, the first proverb is Proverbs 1:7. Now, before Solomon gives you the first proverb, guess what he does? Lapsed on me again. Okay, before he gives you the first, nope, I need to go back. All right. Before he gives you the first proverb, he gives you his purpose statement, right? And that's the first 6 verses. And I think we have them. Yeah, they're all up here for you to look at. But look at some of these. These are goal statements. You see that I'm writing it to do this. So what does he say? To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple. To the young man, knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. This is his purpose statement. And so I think what he's telling you here is, if studied carefully, this will teach you how to solve the riddles, understand the words of the wise, perceive is a darash, that's darash language. It's something beyond what it plainly says. You're perceiving further, right? So all these ideas, these levels of interpretation, I believe are summed up or hidden or mixed in these goals that Solomon gives us, right? And so maybe let's just look at an example, right? He says enigmas. Some translations say dark sayings. I think that's a good one. That's a saying that's hidden behind something. It's had the lights covered or taken out from it. It's covered over, right? Let's look at an enigma first, one that I think he's talking about. What does he say? He says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him also." Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. All right? So do you answer the fool or do you not answer the fool? He told you to do both. Which do you choose? So you have two possible outcomes. All right? So you could be a fool for answering him, or you could prevent him from having sort of a false confidence that he should not have. All right, so which do you do? Right, well, if you think about this enigma, you realize you have to apply something that you learned somewhere else in Proverbs. He's teaching you how to solve the riddles, how to solve the enigmas within. And so the answer is that the fool's folly is that he has nothing to say of value. That's his problem. So he says nothing of value. Well, here's the thing. If you can't adequately correct him and provide value in your answer to him, you have just become like him by doing the fool's folly, providing words of no value. But if you can adequately compel him with an answer, show him his folly, you should answer, right? But if you don't have the value and you do, you have become a fool as well, right? Christ also spoke in riddles and parables during his entire ministry. Most of what he said publicly was in riddles and parables. And many of the times, the people did not understand. This is pointed out to us many times. And he explains why he does this. He explains it in Luke 8 and 9. There's also parallels in Matthew and Mark for those. But it's after the parable of the sower, the disciples come to him and specifically say, all right, the disciples come to him and they say, what does this parable mean? And he said to them, well, to you it has been given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but to the rest it is given in parables, that seeing they may not see, and hearing they may not understand. So Yeshua is coding information into these parables. Not everybody is meant to understand, even at that time. And I feel like a lot of these parables, we still don't understand fully. We're still trying to unravel some of those. We still need our eyes opened a little bit. And then Solomon tells us about the hidden mysteries as well. He says, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but it is the glory of the kings to search it out. And where's God concealing things? It's in the words that he's given us. It's in the text. It's in everything that was said and was given and was written down and passed all this time forward so that we could read it. And there's things hidden in there. All right. And I think particularly with Remez interpretations, right, they tend to expand the idea because it's an alluding to something else that has happened in the text. And when you realize that that's a link there, it draws in additional context that can take you into a new room with the understanding of wherever it is you're at, or as you bring it in, a new room, and there's more treasure to be found. Hopefully, it's not too confusing the way I just put that. So I think we should be like kings today, start searching through some of these proverbs, all right? And you're going to get the Peshat level a lot, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. I'll do one right up front, all right? But the first question I want to ask is, and I will demonstrate Peshat through this, is how do you know if a proverb is a proverb? And the answer is actually probably multiple ways. But one thing you'll notice in a proverb is it's a shortened form of a parable. It's a condensed parable, and there's usually two legs, almost always two legs on a proverb. And the thing is that the legs have to be equal. They have to be either equal like this, or they have to be equally opposite. Right? They can't be like equally opposite like that. They have to be going opposite directions equally. All right, and there's a proverb that says, the legs of the lame are not equal, so is a parable in the mouth of fools. Right? The legs, they're not equal. He's trying to pass them off as they're equal, but when it gets to you, like, it's not the apple to the apple he was describing. It's like an apple to a pear. It's really bad apple to an orange, right? But you're either going to be doing a good apple to a good apple or a good apple to a bad apple. Right? So, and this is a Peshat interpretation that we just went through, right? This is what he's trying to tell you. The legs of the lame aren't equal. Neither is a parable on the mouth of fools. It's going to be less effective. It's not going to work. It's not going to taste right either. Okay. So let's look at the very first proverb, right, which actually occurs in chapter 1, verse 7. Let's look at that and see if it works. All right, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. All right. And so I think one thing that you can get from this, understanding that the legs of the lame are not equal, so is a parable, this is an equal parable, right? The person that gave us the legs of the lame parable is not going to give us an unequal parable. We know it's equal, all right? But this is an equally opposite parable because we have the positively charged side, and then we have the negatively charged side, and they're both charged the same direction. And hopefully I can get this explanation out and this makes sense. But if they're both positively charged, you can usually take elements from one and it goes seamlessly into the other. And you see it as he gives more proverbs that this is actually the case. But if you take one from a negatively charged side and you inverse the polarity, you can switch it over to the positively charged side. So what I'm trying to say is that what we understand is that the fear of the Lord is not just the beginning of knowledge, it is also wisdom and instruction. All right? And so we know that the fool doesn't just hate or despise wisdom and instruction, he also despises knowledge. You see how we inversed knowledge from the positively charged to the negatively charged side. The fool also despises that. And we know that because other proverbs say that very plainly. All right, so I think there's another point being made here. This is the seminal event that creates knowledge, wisdom, and instruction. Not just for the person that all of a sudden gains the fear of the Lord, but actually for everything from the beginning of creation. All right, and he does this by linking a remez here by using the term reshit, beginning. And this is not a coincidence that Solomon has this as his very first proverb, and he brings up the beginning. And if you know, this is the very first word of the Bible. Bereshit Elohim v'shahamayim v'het haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And Solomon is linking that as a remez, or linking this proverb as a remez to that. All right. But if you're just reading this in a vacuum, you're going to be like, that's doubtful. Like, prove that. Can you show me? Can you show me that he's doing this? All right. All right. So let's look at this. Remember how I said you could positively charge the wisdom and instruction from 1:7. You can move it over. All right. Well, Proverbs 9:10 like shows that, because now he's giving us the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. All right. So now we know that that's true. All right. And the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So there's two positive sides to this. But it's interesting, he brings up the beginning here because we've already told us, fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Now we know it's the beginning of wisdom. And we're assuming that it was also the beginning of understanding. This happens in chapter 9 where this occurs. If you look back just a few verses, actually to the very beginning of this chapter, what do you find? Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. Right? This is him telling you, bringing it all back together to the beginning. What is the house that he's talking about? And why is wisdom? Where is wisdom building it? This is wisdom coming to create the world at the very beginning of creation. What are the 7 pillars? It's the first 7 days that God created as he brought everything into being. Right? As each pillar is installed, everything that we know has come into existence. All right. And I'm absolutely convinced that Solomon is leaving a trail of interlocking remez crumbs to show us the importance of the beginning, right? This is where God placed all the laws of science, of math, of universal everything into place. And I would have a hard time understanding the rest of the book without realization. And I think that the gospel writer John, he's doing the exact same thing whenever he opens his gospel. In the beginning was the logos, right? The logic, the wisdom, the word, the understanding. It's all of these things, right? And through it, everything was made that was made. All right, now this concludes my introduction to the bat mitzvah, or to this teaching. But what I really wanted to look at, because it's Sydney's bat mitzvah, but also because it's inspiring any day, is the Proverbs 31 virtuous woman. All right, there is something really special about this chapter, and I think it's so special that Solomon wanted it to be the very last chapter in this book. And one thing I just want to point out, because I think this is really cool, and if you know Hebrew and you can see this far, it's an acrostic poem. It's an acrostic poem. And when they do an acrostic poem, there's a pattern of acrostic poems being love poems. Right? It goes Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, all the way through. There's 22 letters in the alphabet. There's 22 verses in Hebrew, 21 in English. Okay? And you see David doing the same thing. Psalm 119, the longest book in the Bible. It is an acrostic poem. Every letter of the alphabet starts an 8-verse section that he did. So I'm going to make 3 claims here. I'm not actually going to be able to prove all of them. I don't have time to do that, but I want to make 3 claims, mostly so you can understand where I'm coming from on some of this. All right, so claim 1 is the woman wisdom from Proverbs chapter 1 is actually the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31. Don't have time to demonstrate it. Take my word for it. It doesn't matter. That's where I'm coming from. All right. Because I think Solomon is starting with wisdom and he's ending with wisdom. All right. And both of these women, as they are presented to us, are actually broad allusions to the Torah as a whole. So, claim 2. Solomon is doing remez, or I just gave away. I was going to ask a question. Solomon is linking to stories in the Torah that he wants women to know and internalize, and he wants to make men know and internalize them too, so they can make sure their women also know. He wants everybody to know and internalize them. Let's just cut to the chase. All right, and then third, Solomon is literally and plainly outlining a virtuous woman, important qualities that he thinks they should have. Right. So remember what he says? He says one of his goals is to be able to perceive the words of understanding. All right. So let's kind of jump into this, and I'm doing remez first. Okay. It says, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband does safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. We'll pause right there. These 3 introductory verses are where we meet the virtuous woman and a husband. All right. He shall have no need of spoil. It's translated in other places as he's not ever going to be poor. He's not going to be ruined. Right. He's going to have an easy life because his wife is not going to ruin him. But I think there's something, the remez here. I think that this is looking at another story with the husband and wife, where there's being able to discern between good and evil, and where there is spoil. Does this ring any bells? Like you hear these like three things sort of brought up. Does that remind you of any particular story? So I think this is a reference back to Genesis 2:9. God plants a tree in the Garden of Eden along with the tree of life, but this one is called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Adam and Eve, they were told this was off limits, but their disobedience brings something into the world that was not present there before. And this was spoil, decay, death. And I believe this is a clear Remez reference back to the garden story where not discerning between, sorry, let me start over. This is a remez back to there because we have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We're supposed to give you discernment between good and evil, and the virtuous woman has the ability to discern, and she chooses the good, and this is what is bringing her husband no spoil, whereas in the beginning we did not have that, and we brought spoil in. All right. Let's move down to 31:14. Okay, this says, she's like merchant ships. She bringeth her food from afar. There's something always about the literal interpretation of this that just doesn't quite, you're like, what does that mean? Like, what's so virtuous about bringing in food from afar or being like this merchant ship? And especially today, like what's considered virtuous is local sourcing or having your own garden, not needing to go outside of it. So why? What is going on here? But I think that even back then, everyone had their own herds, they had their own gardens, they had and if they didn't have it, they were purchasing locally, right? Not a lot of outsourcing to China like we have today. All right. However, it does take a lot of planning. It takes a lot of coordination to be able to organize some sort of, shipment from far away from another country. All right. So I think this might be a remez back to a man in Genesis 6 that God commanded to build a big boat, an ark, that could carry an unbelievable amount of food, animals, and everything else. And the building of this ark is actually the longest food preservation story in the history. This is a 100-year job to be able to preserve that food, to be able to preserve humanity through the work and job that Noah did. And I think Joseph actually, for a good reason, has a very similar theme to what Noah did in his preservation of all of known humanity by storing up and helping make it through the 7-year famine that occurred in Egypt. Of course, let me see this. So to me, this is a nice, really remez back to this, I believe. Right. Okay. All right. I want to get to my final remez here. It says, she is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all of her household are clothed in scarlet. Let me just ask you this question. What is it about the color scarlet, or particularly red, that causes additional warmth? Why is the red cloth warmer than the non-red cloth? Right? And I'll tell you, scholars do have an answer for this. They say that this scarlet cloth refers to something called a shani, which was dyed red to show that its quality was there. They're normally, they don't have to be red, but the shani was red as an indication of quality. But I think this is a remez, where I want to offer a remez interpretation. I think it references the night of Passover. As death passes over each home there on the first Passover in Egypt, the doorways that were covered in a deep scarlet from the blood of a lamb, those households had no need to fear the cold of death. And that Passover foreshadowed the sacrifice of the Lamb of God. And if you're clothed in his work, you should also have no fear for an eternal cold death. And even in Hebrew, the word that it uses for snow here, shaleg, it has a historical link to death, and that they reference this color, or the shaleg, as a color also for the burial linens that people would use. It's a white snow, obviously, but also as the color of burial linens. Right. I want to move from the Ramez interpretation to the Darash. Can get it to open again. There we go. All right. All right, let's just jump right into this. Starting in verse 10. I'm probably gonna read some of these verses multiple times, but it says, "Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies." I think that there's a Darash interpretation right here, and it's dispelling the myth that we are told, but you automatically know this is not true, that all people have the same value. All people valued exactly the same. We're told this. Some people are told this. Some people say it. But this tells us that this woman, her value is higher than some because she has virtues, she has character. And it's actually the character of a person that determines their value. Higher character, more contributions to your family, to your community, to those around you, to your employer, right? You become a more valued person. Sorry, it's just a cold fact. And it's uncomfortable for some people to live with, right? But you know what? You build character, you build value, right? It's never too late to start. It's another hard truth that all people will not be equal in God's coming kingdom. Yeshua tells us himself. He says in Matthew 5:18, he says, those that are going to be relaxing the least of my laws, they're going to be called least in the kingdom. Those that are doing and teaching the same, they're going to be called the ones great in the kingdom. So equality doesn't work here on earth. And it's not going to work in the final kingdom either. Right, let's move on. It says, the heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. There's two qualities here. Both are crucial to your value: trustworthiness and dependability. Right, and just so we don't run out of time, let me just tell you there's one quality that's underlying a lot of these that are mentioned here, and this is integrity. Right, I'll just give you my sort of, I guess, like homemade definition for this. This is like morally shored up, to have integrity. And it's your values are in tune with God's, first of all, but they're also tight. They don't leak. They're not flexible, right? You have your values. You're a person of integrity. All right, and also I was in the Air Force, and their first core value was integrity. Integrity first, as they would say. All right, let's move into 13. She seeketh wool and flax, worketh willingly with her hands. She's like the merchant ships. She bringeth her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household and a portion to her maidens. She considereth the field, and she buys it, and with the fruit of her hands she planteth the vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle does not go out at night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hand holds the distaff. So there's a big chunk right there. But it's still undergirding our main character traits that we're looking, and it adds a few more. Anybody want to throw out a character quality they think that this added on top of the list we already got going? Diligence, hardworking. Yeah, those are both really good. What? Sure. I'm gonna throw out industriousness. Industriousness. This woman is making and doing stuff. She's not sitting around watching soap operas. She's not on Instagram constantly or consumed with video games. She's a go-getter out there making stuff. All right. And she's also forward thinking, and she's planning, and she's helping her community. And you see that she's considering a field before she buys it, right? And she's doing cost benefit analysis. She's pretty smart. She's developed discernment, right? Discernment is hugely underrated quality, by the way. And this is a major factor in wisdom, right? That you can discern between good and evil. And we're told in 11 told, okay, skip a little bit here. It says she put strength on her loins and she strengthened her arms. Right? Now, loins is a conceptual, it's a concept of your center here, is what this is. And I've got a good story about what I think this means, strengthening your loins. I used to work at the Air Force. We did this study. I was with the Studies Analysis Squadron. We did this big study, and it was all about figuring out for our special forces groups what quality it was in recruits that made them make it all the way through the torturous programs they had. Huge washout rates. Okay, look at all these candidates, talk with all the instructors. What is it? And then we can target that at people, right? We figure out what it is. We can target that. We can recruit for that. And we'll have more people making it through combat control, pararescue, TACP. So we went to the instructors and gathered all this data, everything like that. And we kept hearing the same thing. You can get all the physical data, get their run times, get their pull-up count, do strength tests, do all this. None of that's going to make any difference. There's one thing, and you can't test for it. It's called grit. This is mental fortitude. They said you can't spot it in people until you get them in the training and you push them. And I've got a definition for grit. Simple. It's a positive attitude in the face of pain and adversity. Right? Mental fortitude. This woman's loins are girded to the hilt with it. Right? She's braced for trial, for disappointment, for failure, right? And she's going to buckle down and she's going to push through it and she's going to make it. Okay. All right, let's keep going. She stretcheth out her hands to the poor, yea, she reacheth her hands forth to the needy. Right? This virtuous woman has a kind heart, which gains for her the quality of generosity. And this quality generosity is something I call the mystical multiplier. It's the second time I've used the term mystical today. Okay, but it appears that something with a generous person occurs at a different level behind the scenes, right? And Solomon talks about this. He tells us straight up the same thing in Proverbs 11:24. There is one who scatters and yet increases more. There's one who withholds more than is right, but that leads to poverty. The generous fruit of the soul will be made rich, and the soul that watereth will be watered itself, right? So Solomon is contemplating this sort of life riddle. How you can't use math to solve this problem, because this person, all right, let's do math. Okay, they had 3. Then they gave away 2. How many do they have left? Well, math says 1. No, they have 4. How did that happen? You can't figure it out, right? Solomon says it's a mystery. All right, but you take a stingy person, right? They had 4. They kept all 4 to themselves. How many did they have? They had like 2. Somehow 2 of them went away, right? That's how generosity works. You see the generous soul being made fat. That's what it says. All right. 21. It says, she's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all of her household is clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry, her clothing a silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. She maketh fine linen, she sells it, and delivereth sashes to the merchants. Girls. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in the time to come. All right, 4 of these 6 verses are about wearing something, very interestingly. Either material or some clothing, a covering that's being used here. As we go into the final section, I want you to keep this last verse here in mind. What does this mean? That she's clothed in honor. And how does that make the equation full that she will rejoice in the time to come? All right. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and her tongue is in the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, eateth not the bread of idleness. Her children arise up, they call her blessed, and her husband also, when he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Favor is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Let her, or give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. All right. I think we pulled enough Darash points out of this. I'm ready to get in and try and give you a SOD level interpretation. I've been really excited about this. It's the first time I've ever done this. SOD level interpretations are controversial sometimes, but they shouldn't have too much weight placed on them as some sort of a primary interpretation, right? What the SOD interpretation is an exercise, I think, in comprehension, that because it's engaging your mind with other resources like science and math and things of that nature. Okay, so remember, it's not a primary interpretation. Okay, if I were to ask this group the question, who can explain the difference between wisdom, knowledge, and understanding? I know I would have some really, really good answers. I bet a lot of people have got a pretty good grasp on that. And I think a lot of Solomon's Proverbs are about these 3 things. He's mentioned all 3 in his goal statements. He uses the terms many times. Let me introduce you to an idea about, there's a diagram of these attributes called the 10 Sephirot. All right? And it's 10 attributes of God that they say that he has. And wisdom sits on the top right corner, and on the other side of it is understanding. And they sort of connect through the middle by knowledge, Dayat, which is in the middle. So it's Chokmah, Bina, and Dayat in the middle. All right, and the understanding is an attribute that takes input from knowledge and wisdom through the force of wisdom. But understanding is its own thing. But it's an enlightenment to a reality, either a physical or spiritual reality, that is different than wisdom or knowledge, right? And it's spoken of. All right, let me start over. Wisdom is spoken of as a pearl or a ruby, something of value, something you want to grab, something that shines. Right? Solomon writes a whole book about it, but many of the references he gives you are things that you're looking right at. But he does something, and he says something about it that sheds the light on it, where all of a sudden you can see its value. All right? He says, go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Now, who would have thought a lazy person could go to this, look at a few ants, and all of a sudden coming away with a new perception of how they should be involved with work and in the world. Right? But you can knock over an ant pile and you'll see what they do. They'll rebuild it right in front of you. You'll see them carrying their little babies, their eggs, and their larvae around. You'll see them going out to get food, getting more dirt to pile up to make their ant pile bigger. Right? And they do it in incredible teamwork. And ants are really something to be studied and to figure out, like, why do they have this intrinsic nature, this character about them? Right? But would I have considered watching ants a thing of value unless Solomon had held this out to me? little stone about ants. Policy says, go look at them, right? The ants, knowing about the ants is knowledge, right? But looking at them, letting that go to the understanding side, the being of this is the womb where wisdom creates the reality. But when you see the ants and you see that, it becomes a new reality for you to learn from. All right. Hopefully, it took a long time to make that little bit of information there. All right. I want to get it to what I really wanted to. All right. The Eshet Chayil is a passage that's read at the opening of Shabbat. We read it last night, right? And it's perceived by most to be a blessing that the husband is pronouncing over his wife. That the husband is asking Almighty God to imbue his wife with the character and with the rewards of the virtuous woman, right? But the sages say that what it's actually for is to invoke the Shekinah, bring that light of the divine presence into the Sabbath. The Shekinah, if you're more familiar with that term. Right. And this is done after singing the song Shalom Aleichem, which that song is a song about inviting God's angels to come and have dinner and join your family for Shabbat. So why is this? Why is this in this order? I'll tell you, I'll just get right to the point. The core of this is about returning to the Garden of Eden. It's a longing for the reversal of the curse that humanity is under, right? The angels guarding the garden return. They show the entrance to the garden. They stand and they protect it. And it creates this place that's holy time and space. And then the Shekinah, the visible spirit or the Shekinah of God, has the freedom to uncover itself with mankind once again, right? To be visible with people once again, to walk, talk, and commune with people like it did with Adam and Eve in the garden. This is the ultimate tikkun olam. You're familiar with that term, repair of the world. But everything that lives can have a corporate identity. And then Sydney spoke of this earlier. The corporate identity, and she talked about the difference between individuality and corporate groups, right? Gomer was representing Israel, and you have many New Testament scriptures referring to the community or believers corporately as the body of Christ, a singular identity, right? But the household is a scaled up version of the individual, right? They say it's inviting God's divine presence, his divine light into the household. And the Sabbath, where he's entering this time, is a scaled down version of eternity. But if you scale it down, if you scale the household down all the way, it goes to the individual. And if you scale the Sabbath all the way up, it is eternity. And so the same for the traditional Sod interpretation occurs. So the sages say that it says of the Eshet Chayil, who can find her? Because the implication is that no one can see her. Because the light is hidden only internally. It is not visible. And so you can't go look for her and find her because the light is contained within. But when she opens her mouth, when she speaks, when she does things with her hands, that's when she reveals that there is a light inside. And it's exhibited through the works that she does. And the light is only figuratively visible, and the gemstone is only figuratively revealed as she does things, as she speaks, as she works, as she helps her community. And I think we think this light is only figurative, but I think it's literal. It's just not visible. At the opening of Matthew 17, it speaks of this. Now, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as light. I think this is the light of the Shekinah, the light of the divine presence. As he was transfigured, the spiritual reality was uncovered and exposed for them to see. 3 disciples. So the Eshet Chayil embodies the same light as the Messiah. For now, you can only sense it in her. You can't literally see it. She takes on more and more qualities of the Messiah, which are outlined in Proverbs 31 and all through the Gospels, as he demonstrated them in person. And the light of the divine Shekinah grows within her, and it builds itself. And it tells us that this will be exposed for literal viewing at the transfiguration of the world. As it says in 1 John 3:2, it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is, in the transfigured state. And as I close this up, I want to remind you the purpose of the study. The purpose of the Bat Mitzvah is to set you a spiritual bar to achieve and to keep reaching for the character of the Eshet Chayil, which is the character of Christ. Proverbs 31:30. Charm is deceitful, beauty is passing. The Hebrew word there is hevel. It's just a breath. It's gone. It's about impending mortality. But a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Her works praising her in the gates is a reference to the final day, the entrance into eternity, the 8th day of the week, when the spiritual reality is uncovered. She's transfigured to reveal the light that was built from taking on Messiah's character. Sydney, I hope that from going through this, from now closing up our experience and our study together, you've not just seen the technique, you've not just heard the technique, but you've seen the techniques given, and the perhaps the study of the Eshet Chayil will grow your light. And I want to keep talking Bible with you. I want to keep studying with you as often as possible, and I hope you do too. I love you.